Welcome to another episode of Scream Appeal. Today, Goosebumps Monster Blood. This book has an interesting character by the name of Evan. Evan's mom and dad are moving to a new location because of work in Atlanta. And he, unfortunately, has to stay with his Aunt Catherine. His Aunt Catherine is a very strange woman. She's a big lady. She's deaf, but refuses to learn how to sign, refuses to read lips, and we get to know her a little bit throughout the book. There's a couple more characters. We have Trigger, who is Evan's dog. It's a common theme here with the dogs, I feel like, in these books. And we have another very important character is Andy. And Andy is a girl who kind of gets mixed up in some of Evan's problems in this book. And last but not least, we have Sarah Beth, who is another pet, a cat. And she is actually Aunt Catherine's cat. The book starts off with Evan's mom leaving him at Aunt Catherine's doorstep. She and her husband need to find a home in Atlanta because he has a new job opportunity. And why they can't take Evan is unknown. He's 12 years old. I think he'd be old enough to be with them. But they decide that they need to find someone to take care of him, so they leave him at Aunt Catherine's house. And this is Evan's father's aunt. It's not his aunt. And he's never met her. He's obviously cautious and doesn't feel comfortable with this whole situation that his parents have put him in. Obviously, Evan doesn't like the fact that he's going to have to stay with his lady that doesn't hear and doesn't do sign language, doesn't try to read lips. He feels like he's staying with some stranger that doesn't really care about him or doesn't even really know him. He's complains to his mother saying, that he doesn't want to stay there. Why can't he be with them? Which these are very good questions. But the mom, in Goosebumps parent fashion, says, "No, you're 12 years old. Stop acting like an infant." She starts messing with his hair, and he says, "I don't like that you do that. I don't like that." And the mom says, "Oh, you just hate me." Trying to make him feel bad for what she's doing to him. This is perfectly normal behavior. He doesn't want to be left with a stranger. Why couldn't he tells his mom, "Why couldn't you and dad involve me in your decisions, in your discussions?" So eventually they get Aunt Catherine's attention. She comes to the door. To Evan's surprise, she's not the frail old lady he was expecting. She is an old lady, but she's big. She looks strong. She's got a deep voice. And Catherine lets them into the house, and she starts remembering raising Evan's father and asking him questions. And of course, she's not paying attention to any body movement, and she also can't hear. So Evan's answers are irrelevant. She says things like, "Do you like the girls? Yeah, your father liked the girls. Be careful with me, I'm a witch. I'm a witch, be careful." She notices Trigger and says, "Ooh, we'll put the dog in the pie. We'll make a dog pie." And of course, Evan is just freaking out that he's going to be left with this lady. He's looking at his mom, pleading for her not to leave him there. And the mom just keeps dismissing. She says, "I'm counting on you. I need you to do this. I'm counting on you." Just guilt-tripping him into staying with Aunt Catherine. And eventually the mother leaves. And he's stuck there with her. He doesn't know how long he's going to be there, because the mother and the father need to look for a home to live in. And he's hoping it only takes about 2 weeks, but we don't know. So Evan sees Aunt Catherine's cat, Sarah Beth, And Sarah Beth doesn't like Trigger at all. And Trigger doesn't like Sarah Beth. The dog starts barking, Sarah Beth starts hissing. Aunt Catherine says, "You need to be careful with Sarah Beth. She's evil. She's evil." He says, "Bring the dog. We're going to tie it in the back." So they go and they tie up the dog in the back, and this makes Evan even more miserable. He thought at least he'd have his dog by his side, having to stay with Aunt Catherine. But now he's tied up in the back. So tries to find the first opportunity to grab Trigger and take him out for a walk. So he takes Trigger for a walk, and on his walk he meets this girl named Andy. And Andy says, "Oh, I like your dog. I bet your dog has a stupid name." He says, "What's his name?" And he says, Evan tells him, "It's Trigger." "That is a stupid name. I like stupid names." He says, "What's your name?" He says, "My name's Evan." He's like, "That's a stupid name too. I like stupid names." And she, introduces her name, Andy. And she says, "That my name's stupid too." Anyways, in conclusion, Andy likes stupid things. Or whatever she considers to be stupid. And so Evan is kind of talking to Andy and getting to know her, and he wants to know what there is to do in this town, because he doesn't want to be at home with Aunt Catherine. So Andy tells him about that there's these 2 toy stores in town. There's this new one, but then there's this old one that she really likes. So she wants to take him to this old toy store. So as they're browsing through this old toy store, Evan finds a can of Monster Blood. This can has no directions, no ingredients, nothing. It's just a can that says Monster Blood. But he wants it. And when Andy sees it, she wants it too. So Evan kind of takes the approach of, I found it first. And he goes to buy it. And even though the owner is reluctant and doesn't want to sell it to them, he says, as long as you don't return it, you can buy it. He buys the Monster Blood, and Andy follows him home because she wants to see it too. They go back to Aunt Catherine's, and Aunt Catherine asks to see the can. She kind of holds the can. Seems like she's mumbling something with the can, and gives it back to Evan. And she says, "You just be careful with that. You just be careful." And Evan and Andy just run up the stairs as fast as they can and open up the can. They want to see what this Monster Blood looks like. And it's really just a ooze, like goo. It's a bright green. It's cold. When you put your fingers in it, it kind of sucks them in. Evan says, "Hey, I bet, let's see if it glows in the dark." They turn off the lights and it glows in the dark. "Let's see if it's bouncy." They bounce it on the floor, and sure enough, it is bouncy. And they say, "Well, let's see if it's stretchy." And they pull it apart, and it's stretchy. Andy thinks it's really cool, but Evan's not too impressed. He said, I've had things like this before. It's kind of suction, glows, it's bouncy. This is nothing special. But, to kill time, they start bouncing the ball back and forth. They start tearing pieces off of the Monster Blood and bouncing those balls back and forth, and jumping and throwing them around. And one ball goes soaring over to where Trigger is, and Trigger starts smelling it. Evan's screaming, "No, boy, no, please, don't eat it." But Trigger is a very disobedient dog, as we find out in the book, and he eats the Monster Blood. So Evan's worried about Trigger. He's hoping he doesn't get sick, and Andy has to get going home. The next day, he goes for a walk and runs into these 2 twin boys, big, bulky boys. And they're telling him, "You can't be walking here. You're not a resident." He said, "What do you mean? You can't be walking here. You're not from here. You're not a resident. But we can allow you to walk here if you pay a price." Evan says, I don't have any money. So it looks like these two boys are getting ready to beat him up. They're pushing him, grabbing him. And Andy comes by on her bike. "Get away from him, you creeps. Get away." And then the twin brothers push her off her bike and steal it. One of the brothers steals it, and the other one runs behind. So Andy saves Evan from a beating, but she gets her bike stolen. She explains that these twins, they're called the Bamer twins, and they're just really big bullies of the neighborhood. They are always taking advantage and beating people up and stealing their stuff. She's not worried because they've stolen her bike before, and eventually she always finds it somewhere in town whenever they're grown tired of it. Andy wants to go back to Aunt Catherine's to see the monster blood, and Evan says okay. He wants to check up on Trigger too, to make sure he's doing okay. So they go to where the monster blood is, and the can is open. The monster blood is popping out of the can. It's growing. It's not cold anymore, it's warm now. And it's not bouncy anymore, it's sticky. Something weird is going on here with the monster blood. They hear in the backyard something going on with Trigger. And they run outside and see that it looks like Trigger's choking. His collar has gotten smaller. Or has he gotten bigger? Evan tries his hardest and pulls the collar off of him. And he sees that, yes, his Trigger's grown in size exponentially. But he's just a Cocker Spaniel. He was pretty much full grown. He shouldn't be growing like this. He decides that the next day he will take him into the vet. And they call it a night. That night, Evan has a dream that Trigger keeps growing, and he's about the size of a pony. He's the size of a pony, and he has big jaws, and he's howling. He runs off, and he attacks the Bamer twins. So Evan wakes up and realizes it was just a dream. So that next day he takes Trigger to the vet, and the vet doesn't really have any explanations. He doesn't know why the dog is growing so much. And he does recognize that he's very big for a Cocker Spaniel. So after the vet visit, Evan and Trigger go to get some ice cream. And on their walk away from the ice cream shop, they run into the Bamer twins again. And this time the Bamer twins want Trigger. They knock the ice cream out of Evan's hands and try to grab the dog. But he starts howling, starts showing his fangs, starts trying to attack them, and out of fear they run away. Evan has to chase after Trigger and grab him. His dream came true. He took Trigger home. To his surprise, he sees that the monster blood is still growing. It's gotten very big, enough to fill up a bucket. And the realization comes that this must be the reason why Trigger is growing as well. He calls Andy out of desperation and pleads with her when she gets there to please take some of it off of his hands, and until they can figure out what to do with it. At this point, Andy doesn't want anything to do with the monster blood. She's scared too, but out of friendship and wanting to help Evan, she decides to grab a bucket and take it home too. Now, even though Evan was able to give some monster blood to Andy, the monster blood in his bucket just keeps growing and growing. It fills to the top, and he takes the monster blood down to the basement where Aunt Catherine has an old tub. He dumps all the monster blood in there. And before he knows it, he sees Sarah Beth lurking around. And Sarah Beth jumps on him and pushes him into the tub. Now the monster blood is sucking him in. He's trying with all his force to pull himself out, but this monster blood is sucking him in. he uses all of his strength to pull himself out and pull himself free of the monster blood. Evan and Andy decide that they're going to take this blood back to the store. And as they drag it in these huge trash bags across town and finally make it, they realize the store's out of business. So what they end up doing is putting the monster blood in a garbage bin and locking and sealing the top. After they do this, Aunt Catherine comes out and tells Evan that she has some good news and that his mom is coming, and he's ecstatic. He's so happy, and could care less now about the monster blood. He feels like it's not his problem anymore. Andy isn't so happy for him. I think on one hand, she's probably gonna miss him, and on the other hand, she's still thinking about the monster blood, probably more the latter. But what happens is, Trigger, it has kept growing, and now he's the size of a pony, just like in his dream, and he's running off. Evan tries to chase after his dog, but he trips over the garbage bin, and the monster blood spills out into the street. The monster blood starts rising, starts stretching, it starts looking around, and then it starts to chase Evan. Andy's trying to help him. It's alive. This monster blood is now going after Evan. As Evan's running away, the Bamer twins turn the corner, and out of fear, they scream and start running off. The monster blood goes after the Bamer twins and sucks them in. Now the Bamer twins are inside the monster blood, and their bodies seem lifeless as the monster blood's bouncing around and chasing Evan. And Catherine opens the door to the house and says, "What is that?" And the monster blood chases her into the house. The kids know that they have to go into the house and save Aunt Catherine. But as they go into the kitchen and see the monster blood hovering over her, Aunt Catherine says, "No! Get out of here, kids! Get out of here! I made this, now I need to die." You made this? Aunt Catherine made this? But they bought it at the store. After Aunt Catherine says this, Evan remembers Aunt Catherine asking for the monster blood can when he'd first bought it at the store, and how she held it in her hands and mumbled some things to it. He said, "You put a spell on it. You made this monster blood do these things. This is all your fault." And Aunt Catherine says, "No, it wasn't my fault. She made me do it." At first, Evan thinks that she's pointing to Andy, but she's actually pointing to Sarah Beth. As she says this, Sarah Beth, the cat, starts transforming into a human form. And Catherine says, "Your spell over me is broken. I'm done. I'm not your slave anymore." We see Sarah Beth is actually a witch. And we see that Sarah Beth is actually a witch, and that she was hiding as a cat. And Catherine explains that she has been a slave to Sarah Beth, that she has made her do all kinds of horrible things, and that she took away her hearing, that she took away her ability to learn sign language or to read lips, so that she would depend solely on her. She said, "I had no choice. I had to do it." Sarah Beth did not like the idea of Evan coming over, and she wanted to get rid of him. And she was using Aunt Catherine to do it. And she was using the monster blood to do it. Sarah Beth says to Aunt Catherine, "You can't escape me. I own you. You're my slave." And Aunt Catherine says, "No, no more. I'll jump into the blood and end it now." And Sarah Beth says, "Go ahead, but I'm still killing the children." And she says, "Why? You had me. You have everything you've ever wanted from me. Just leave them alone. They have nothing to do with this. But Sarah Beth says, no, now they know too much. These kids will be killed. She looks to the blood and says, kill the children. On repeat. Kill the children. Kill the children. Kill the children. And as the big blob of monster blood is coming after the children, Trigger runs through the door, as big as a pony, and jumps onto Sarah Beth, pushing her into the big blob. And as the big blob starts sucking her in, Trigger begins to shrink. The monster blood begins to shrink. The Bamer twins fall out of the monster blood. And Sarah Beth is gone. At this point, the Bamer twins are so freaked out, they just run outside the door at full speed. Evan is so happy now to see that everything is okay with Trigger, and that the monster blood has shrunk down back to can size. And Catherine is happy too, because now she can hear again. She is herself again. She's a free lady. And as the joy begins to erupt between all the members that are in this household, inside comes Evan's mom and says, "What happened? I saw these two teenagers running outside. They were scared." And Catherine says, "Come on in. Let me make you a tea. I have a long story to tell you." And of course the mom doesn't skip a beat. "Well, we actually need to get going to the airport." Evan says, "No, Mom. This is a story you need to make time for. This is a story you're going to want to hear." And of course, wouldn't be a Goosebumps book without some kind of twisty ending. Evan and Andy start talking about, how they were going to keep in communication and how they'll share each other's numbers and try to keep in contact. And Andy says, "If you don't mind, I would really like to keep the monster blood, now that it's small." Evan says, "That's all right with me. You can go ahead and keep it." And as they look to the corner where the monster blood was, it's gone. So I actually have a lot of thoughts about this book, Monster Blood. The first one being the characters. We had a wide variety of characters on this one. We had the monster, which in reality was a fake monster. The real monster was Sarah Beth, the cat, the witch, and the blob was kind of her doing, a secondary monster, if you will. Then we have Aunt Catherine, who is the mysterious kind of character. We don't really know what's going on with her, what to expect from her, if she's part of the problem, or if she's just a side character that just causes grief to Evan. We have Evan and a good friend he makes in Andy, and at the same time, bullies that he meets in the Bamer twins. And then we have Trigger, the pet of this Goosebumps book. And of course, in Goosebumps fashion, the pet is always the guinea pig, right? In Dead House, the dog was the first one to die. And in this one, he's the first one to be affected by the monster blood in the way that he just keeps growing because he ate it. Now, I believe the book leads us to think that the monster blood was really just some goo from a store, and that it came to life because of the incantation done by Aunt Catherine on behalf of the witch, Sarah Beth. But it shows at the end that it disappears. And we don't know if this is because of Sarah Beth. Is this Sarah Beth's doing? Or was the monster blood still under some kind of incantation? One thing I really enjoyed about this book is the interactions between the characters. I think the Bamer twins were very two-dimensional. bully characters, but Andy and Evan and their relationship just kind of blossomed throughout the the book. I feel like they had really great chemistry. They were just a couple of preteens that liked stupid things, and while Evan was trying not to be impressed with the monster blood, Andy was very impressed. And while Evan didn't seem to want to impress Andy, he really treasured her as her friendship and looked to her for help when he needed help the most. I think their relationship was great, and I do like how Aunt Catherine gets a happy ending and how we get to see what she had been struggling with this whole time. But as far as the monster goes, I wish that the monster blood wasn't so shapeless. I think the book could have made the story a little more spookier, a little cooler if the monster blood could take some kind of shape. Maybe it would still stay green and oozy, but it would make the face of a monster with big jaws, or it could make different kinds of weapon shapes chasing after these kids. But it was just a big blob bouncing around up and down on the street, and I obviously see how that could be spooky, but in a way it's also kind of comical. So, and I understand it wasn't the official monster, that being Sarah Beth, but we also don't really get too much about Sarah Beth. We get a little dialogue from Aunt Catherine about who Sarah Beth is and what she's been doing to her, but I would have liked a little bit more detail on why Sarah Beth chose Aunt Catherine, why she was in this neighborhood, what her purpose was in living with Aunt Catherine and making her her slave. What were the reasons for these things? And I don't know if there's a second book to this. If there is, I look forward to it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of unanswered questions about Sarah Beth and just the monster in general. So as far as a rating, I think I'll give it like a 3 out of 5. I really liked the relationships. I liked the build up, and the end was well constructed. I just wish we would have gotten more on the monsters. Would have understood a little bit more. I would have appreciated a little more detail, a little bit more background story on Sarah Beth. But overall, I really like this book. So far, we're 3 for 3, and I'm liking these books a lot. Thank you for tuning in with me here at Scream Appeal. Stay spooky, my friends.